Well, congratulations. You've made it to week 5 of our 6-part series on Ephesians. I'm glad you're hanging in there, and I'm excited to dive in with you this evening or morning or whenever you're happen to watching the video. Let's jump right in. Ephesians chapter 5 verses 1 and 2. Imitate God. Wow. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Continuing the thread that he began and continued through chapter 4 and into chapter 5, Paul is talking about this new life that we are called to live. And he raises this very high bar, this challenge for us to imitate God. Wow. And yet that's what God has called us to do. But he hasn't left us alone to do it all by ourselves. He has empowered us with the Holy Spirit. He's given us his holy word. He has surrounded us with brothers and sisters to help each other grow in the unity of the faith and into maturity. So this isn't like it's such a high bar, it's unattainable. God has equipped us and resourced us to make progress in this. I think that's beautiful. That's powerful. Now, throughout the rest of this chapter here, he's going to kind of continue on some of his exhortations, calling us to, let there be no sexual immorality or impurity or greed among you. I love the fact that he goes ahead and calls out, says, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Sometimes as churches, as Christians, we like to play, our favorite sins. Like, okay, we'll wag a finger at the sexually immoral person, but then the greedy person, like, oh, well, that's capitalism for you. We forget that sin works its way through all of life, and idolatry can be found everywhere. And Paul calls us out. He says, verse 6, don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on all who disobey him. Don't participate in the things these people do, for once you were full of darkness, but now you have light from the Lord. So live as people of light, for this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. So I want you to take note of some of the images that Paul plays out throughout this letter. For example, in chapter 2, we saw death and life. You were dead in transgressions and sins. God has made you alive. In chapter 4, we see this old self, new self. Put off the old self, almost like taking off a garment. Take off the old shirt, put on the new shirt. Here we see darkness and light. You used to be people of darkness. Now you are in the light. And he's going to continue on to talk about wise and foolish. Verse 15 of chapter 5. So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools. Okay? But like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. I love that. When I was working on my doctorate in ministry, I did a lot of study on what's called mindfulness. And the reality is, a lot of times we don't live mindfully. We live in reaction. We don't plan what we're going to do. We just do. So somebody cuts us off in traffic, instead of thinking, oh, what is the best way of handling this? We're automatically jumping into fight or flight mode and yelling and screaming and doing all kinds of stuff. Paul calls us away from that to a more mindful way of living, to say, let's actually live according to the values and standards and the way of God. Imitate God. How would he have us live? And how he would have us live in all of our interactions, whether it's dealing with somebody cuts you off in traffic, or dealing with husbands and wives, or parents and children, any relationship. How we live is according to Ephesians 5:21. And further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. This is how we are called to live. Again, I just go back to the top of the chapter. Imitate God. All right, follow the example of God. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice. This is the way of Jesus. This is submission out of reverence for Christ. You think about the word submission. First three letters there, sub. It's a prefix meaning to go under. So if I am practicing submission, I am taking my mission, my wants, my desires, and I'm putting them under those of someone else. So for example, when I come home from work today, I have a mission in mind. My mission might be to grab a snack and sit on the couch and play some video games or watch some TV and just turn off my brain for a while. My son's mission might be to spend time with dad and play and roughhouse and do something that I may not feel like I want to do physically. And yet, out of love for my son, my mission to veg gets placed underneath his mission to play. In the same way, my wife might have a few missions for me at home as well. Take out the garbage, help out with the dishes. I sacrifice what I want out of love for them. And it's mutual. We're all doing this together. So husbands, sacrifice for your wives as Christ loved the church. And wives, submit to your husbands out of reverence for Christ. So if I'm putting my wife's needs first and she's putting my needs first, then everyone's needs are being met. If I'm loving my son well and raising him up in the way of the Lord, and my son is respecting me as his father, then there's health and there's wholeness in the relationship. And what's incredible here is Paul says that our marriages are a demonstration of the gospel. It says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And it goes on to talk about how the husband leaving his father and mother, be united to his wife and becoming one flesh, that this is a profound mystery that points to how Christ loves the church. Now that beautiful picture happens because we imitate Christ. We follow his example. We put one another first. Okay? Now that's hard to do. That's overcoming years of lies from the enemy, years of lies from the world, years of habits in our own hearts where we practice selfishness. And yet that's the way of Jesus that he is calling us to learn. So now we're going to pass it back to your group leaders to have a discussion about this and what it means to follow the example of Christ and to imitate God even in some of our most intimate relationships.